Hello and welcome to the Open Era Podcast. My name is Devang and Simon. I'm joined as always by Mr. Simon Bushell. Simon, my friend, it's been a couple weeks, but we're back for Wimbledon. Our favorite time of the year?
Yeah, sure.
You changed, man. We've been off for a while though. How you been? What's new? What's going on?
Yeah, I'm doing okay. It's boiling hot here in Vancouver as we approach the midpoint of the summer, obviously. I guess early summer still. Even though it feels like the midpoint of summer, it's been incredibly warm here. We're up in the high 20s. So for a city like Vancouver, that's very warm. But it's been nice. It's been a nice change from a bunch of the rain that we had earlier in May.
That sweet, sweet rain that Canada desperately needs as our wildfires continue to drift everywhere. This summer, I had my birthday and then promptly destroyed my back soon after. So that was a nice reality check for me while I was away, Simon. But we missed quite a bit of tennis. We missed quite a bit of news. So before we get into Wimbledon and the draw and asking some big questions that we have, shall we run through two huge things? One person leaving, one person returning, and I think stunners all around.
Almost certainly. I don't think I had this anywhere circled on my my bets for 2023 in the tennis calendar. Although, I guess technically, let's start with the return of Caroline Wozniacki and ask a more broad question. Does this mean that Serena Williams is coming back, given how connected these two are at the hip?
You know I'm on the record saying she is, right, Simon? So clearly, after the Ash Barty debacle, I have to double down now and say, yes, it's happening.
Yeah, it feels like it's kind of inevitable at this point. But yes, Caroline Wozniacki returning to tennis 3 years away. Second retirement? First retirement? I don't know what you'd ever call this at this point. I think most people thought she was stepping away from the sport for good, not just because of the arthritis diagnosis that she had, but also she seemed pretty at peace after winning that Australian Open in 2018. It kind of felt like a good end to her career. She had obviously the lovely send-off with a bunch of really nice well wishes to see her off, but she announced that she wanted to come back and be competitive. And I think one of the things that I sort of had highlighted in my notes from some of the speeches that she said is that she wanted to be competitive as well, is that she wanted to be right up there at the top of the tour and be competing for Grand Slams. I think that's a little bit ambitious, but of course, if you're going to make a return at the age of 32, you've got to set your sights high, I think. And that's what she's doing.
Yeah, I think I would lean towards what you're saying, Simon, because she seemed comfortable in the post-tennis life and doing the commentary stuff and really seeming to adapt to it quite well. You're like, okay, you can see her snugly fitting into a role at ESPN for the next 15, 20 years if she wants it. But I think reading that article in Vogue, which seems to be the place to get tennis news these days, I like how all of these announcements are happening in mainstream magazines. I think it's pretty cool. But the idea that she talked to her husband, David Lee, who also was a professional athlete, a professional basketball player for many years, and talking about that need to compete and kind of giving her that North Star that she wanted once her family was established. It makes a lot of sense. Very curious to see what kind of player returns to the tour in Montreal, where she's getting a wild card time, because on her day, just running through some of her stats, we were talking before the show started, Simon, an absolute killer against top 10 players, except Serena Williams, basically.
Yeah, and I think some of the things that could be said about her as well. I was reading an article in The Guardian from when she retired. Actually, no, it's from when she went to world number one. And it's quite provocative, basically saying that she's the most defensive player in tennis history to get to world number one, I believe was the phrase. Have you met Novak Djokovic? Come on, people.
So seems very backhanded.
It does. It really does. I don't know. It's like her record against the top 10 should be good. Like if you're going to be defensive and just be a wall, and she has a very, very good serve as well. Like it gets her out of trouble. I think she should have a consistent record against it. I think also if you look against other players in the top 10, her record is kind of weird though, in terms of her success at Grand Slam level. It's quite up and down through the course of her career. For someone who has been a model of consistency throughout her career, you would kind of expect more business ends of Grand Slams than she actually ended up doing. And admittedly, she had a fantastic career, but from the fact that she was world number one and she was a slam winner, 3-time finalist, you would have thought she got to more quarters and more semis than she actually did.
Fair. I mean, I feel like there was a time where it truly felt like she was never going to get over that hump. And she was someone who could get deep and quite deep in like the turn of the the tens into 2009, 2010, 2011. She was always in the conversation. Frankly, I was stunned when she won in 2018 in Australia. I think going into that final against Halep, I was firmly of the belief that Simona Halep was going to win that match. And I think that tournament as a microcosm was one of those, you deserve this kind of things. The tennis god saying, you know what, for all of these close calls for those two finals you had in New York, you're going to get this one, Caroline. And she did in a pretty amazing match in 2018. So she says she wants to win. She wants to win these titles. I mean, I guess it would be quite strange if she came in and said, well, you know, if I lose, it's okay. I think all of these people, especially the people who have been close to the top or at the top, have that inner demon, if you want to call it, telling them that they are the best of the world when they pick up a racket. She did speak with Serena Bush, mentioned she had dinner with her a few weeks ago. I'm sure that's an obvious inspiration for her since Serena came back after her pregnancy. Will be fun, but we gain Caroline Wozniacki. We lose Annette Kontaveit.
This is a curious one, is it not? Just and a really sad story, just given the fact that her body's completely failed her and the fact that she reached, I would say, the heights of her career and the pinnacle of her talent later on in her career and got to world number 2. And she's obviously featured in Breakpoint as well, which is kind of a kind of fun side story to this whole thing of her being at the center of that Serena Williams retirement at the US Open. But yeah, Annette Kontaveit is retiring due to a back injury, and not just, you know, any kind of back injury, a lumbar disc degeneration. It sounds absolutely horrendous, Devang. It sounds truly, truly horrible. And to the point where it isn't really a surprise when you hear about this and just do some reading around it and various different doctors commenting on this, that it doesn't seem particularly shocking that she's calling it a day. But it's a sad day because for Estonian tennis, she certainly helped put them on the map alongside a bunch of very other good players at the top of the sport. And just from the sounds of it, just a really good person as well. And the other thing about Annette Kontaveit, just a fantastic English accent as well. Yeah. So she has my support.
I think I learned this in the Discord. Josh was saying that she grew up around a lot of English tennis kids when she was a youth and basically picked up the accent that way. But you mentioned carrying that flag around. And I think thanks to her and Kaia Kanepi as well, just seeing that Estonian flag pop up at a bunch of tournaments for a small country like that, I think it's a massive deal. And she mentioned that as well in her post announcing her goodbye. Bush, for a stretch there in 2021, at the end of the season, she was the best player in the world. The indoor GOAT, you could say. I think she was on a ridiculous winning streak, absolutely trouncing everyone that came in her path. I'm glad she got to experience that moment of tennis brilliance because, like you said, this is far too early for someone of her ilk to go down this early. But I mean, I hope she can stick around the game in some facet and help usher in the next wave of Estonian tennis. But yeah, any way you slice it, very sad news.
And I think that they kind of are nicely linked in the sense of touching on that with Wozniacki, of that competitive desire and wanting to come back and not being satisfied in retirement. How do you as an athlete recover from the only thing that you've known and the only thing you've dedicated your life to? And that Kontaveit is 27, Devang.
Yeah. Imagine
doing everything that you could do for this sport up to the age of 27 and then it be immediately cut short. You basically have to reinvent yourself. I mean, I know what you have to do. You have to get a different education, go to a trade college, go to university. I don't know, just do something different, right? Let's just hope that she doesn't end up on the board of a weapons manufacturer or some like some
it's a 50-50
exactly
that she's working for Raytheon in a few weeks. That's
not us any slight to Annette Kontaveit. It's just like the lure of being sucked up by some corporate board who dangle a bunch of money to you is very strong to these players once they try and do some level of washing to their image.
Be very curious to ask this of a former pro, of what it was like for them in terms of observing the sport when they retired. Like I wonder how much Federer has been watching since he left the game. I know it's not nothing, but I can't imagine it's frequent. And I have to imagine getting away from it, stepping away from it, collecting yourself, and then figuring out what you want to do next is what Annette Kontaveit will do. But we wish her all the best. We missed a few tournaments, Simon. The grass court lead up to Wimbledon, far too short, as we've railed on repeatedly, and they need a Masters 1000 event probably going forward. Not to say that there's any room in the calendar, and we'll talk about how they are destroying the tennis calendar a bit later, but What stood out to you, Simon?
Just the quantity, actually. I was surprised. Like, we've only highlighted 4 in the notes here, because, like, just for brevity, but there was quite a lot of tennis that happened over the last 2 weeks. Also, Nottingham happened, but yeah, Queen's Eastbourne, Bad Homburg, which is still the best name, Halle, the one in Germany, Stuttgart that took place as well. Stuttgart and Nottingham, and Birmingham as well. Jesus, like tons and tons.
Berlin, too.
And Berlin, yeah. How many tournaments do you want to pack in the space of 2? We go from the WTA having no tournaments.
Don't worry, Simon. Trust that all of those finals happened at the same time.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Without a doubt. Every single match that was scheduled was against each other, and you couldn't find them anywhere. So not really surprising. The thing that everyone's going to circle on this is that Carlos Alcaraz won on grass, and he won Queens at the first time of asking. Can I tell you something that was a real surprise to me, and something just completely blanked from my mind? Rafa Nadal won Queens. I cannot remember this happening. I had to go back and watch it and be like, oh yeah, he did play at Queen's Club and he won the damn thing. Do you have any memory of this?
Was this pre-2008? Was this that year?
I think it was, yeah.
Yeah. Meant to be. And I mean, he was clearly a dynamo that year at Wimbledon as well. I might have memory hold that as well. I mean, I think you found it in the past, the big guys were basically having to choose between Halle and Queen's Club, right? And Roger had that association with Halle. He was there again, receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award basically with his dad, which I thought was kind of cool. And him chilling with the bear mascot was also heartwarming. But I focus in on Carlos like you because I do love the conversation around him basically commenting as if he is Bambi on grass. Or it's like, oh, look at him move. He walked, he lifted his left leg and then his right leg and then he planted them and then he moved his racket forward and it was a good shot. Like, I think we are maybe underestimating him or treating him with the kid gloves that he doesn't deserve because he's proven himself already. I understand it is a different / weird surface. There's a reason Adrian Manarino is the Zidane of grass, but I feel like Carlos is ready not to win because I think we're all kind of leaning the same way there, but he'll be okay. He'll be fine here.
I think he'll be fine as well. I think he is firmly the second favorite for Wimbledon. But I think one of the other aspects to this is just that he got more comfortable as the week went on. That's what I really looked at for his performance at Queen's Club, is that obviously everyone's going to look at that match against Rinderknech and he was very close to losing it. Actually very, very close to losing it a couple of times and managed to pull it out. And then I thought he was given very, very little trouble at all for the rest of the week and looked very, very comfortable on the surface. It's not like he's never played on grass. I mean, that's the thing that people need to, remember about him. He still practices a lot on this surface.
And as I'm saying this and looking at his draw as well, Rinderknech is hanging around maybe in the second round. Like, I feel like it's going to be some long slogs, but overall, maybe pencil in next year or the year after that for when Carlos Alcaraz will strike for Wimbledon glory. But that was of interest. Alex de Minaur, a perfect foil, Simon.
Perfect foil. Was a very entertaining match. Never got close to him. It's exactly what you want as a tournament organizer.
The other one I wanted to highlight is Eastbourne and the Keys Kasatkina final, which had a nutso tiebreak as well to end it. But I'm guilty of this. I think I've done this hundreds of times on this podcast alone, but I'll take a result like this, zoom in way too much and be like, Madison Keys in Wimbledon? Stay tuned.
Well, yes, absolutely. And I think you could be forgiven for thinking that she has done better at Wimbledon than she actually has. You know how many times she's played at this is our 11th go at Wimbledon. You know how many times she's been past the third round?
I want to say twice.
3 times.
Yikes.
For someone with such an incredible serve and for someone who possesses the power that she does and someone who really should be very, very good on this surface, it's a bit underwhelming, isn't it?
Yeah, and maybe that does speak to how on any given day the grass gods can turn their backs on you and leave you in a real problem. But I feel like every time I watch Madison Keys on grass, it makes too much sense to say, why not her? Why can't she make a deep run of this tournament as well? She's seeded here, which I think is important. I think being a seed matters in the women's side if you want to make a run. I know we've seen quite a few unseeded players make runs, but I do feel in terms of matchups and not getting completely screwed by the draw, like looking at her path, maybe Sakkari in the third round, probably taking Madison Keys. I don't know about you. Baby Badosa's there. Krejcikova's in the 4th round potentially. I think she's got a puncher's chance in all of those matches.
As do I. And I think it's really interesting just looking at the comparisons to the player that won Wimbledon last year. And he's probably the favorite going into this one, Elena Rybakina. Not a million miles away from each other in terms of matchup and game and all that sort of stuff. I think Rybakina's certainly more consistent, I think, at this point in her career. I think just a better player overall. But they're not that far apart from each other from game style perspective. So you do expect, I think, a little more from Keys.
Do you know what Bad Homburg means in German, Simon?
I do not. Are you going to enlighten me?
I looked this up last year, I think, because I was like, what in the world? What does that mean?
Does it mean food poisoning?
The prefix is Bath Homburg. So because it's known for its mineral springs and spas.
Bath Homburg. Okay. Very good.
I hope you learned something today. Did you learn anything from the tennis, though, is my bigger question as I accidentally segued into that.
Don't trust the food around there? Is that roughly what we're trying to say from...
Wow. The truthers are out.
What are the truthers for this? Are they in the Sabalenka, Rybakina camp?
The food was fine. Strategic rest.
Oh, that's okay. That kind of truth. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. No, I think it's really nice to see Katerina Siniakova win a grass court title and a singles title. Singles, yeah. For someone who has been a world number 1 doubles player, has, I don't know, how many double titles does she have at this point? 90? I'm exaggerating. Probably like 25, 30 at this point. Just by all accounts, a really good person as well. And someone who, in doubles, I think translates very, very well on the grass court. And she looked really good all week. So nice to see. She had a horrible draw at Wimbledon, just a disgraceful draw. So this may not translate into Wimbledon, but for the sake of getting that singles title off her back, like fantastic on grass.
Oh, she's in the nightmare section. Yes.
Oh, God.
There's a couple of them on the women's side. We'll get into that a bit later. That's a good story. I did see some paparazzi shots of Iga eating at a restaurant around the time of the withdrawal. But anyways, not to dig too deep into that, but just to talk about Iga on grass, Simon. Not the same as the Carlos discussion. I think Iga's got more of a track record there, but a bit of the same kind of tone where it's like, well, grass is crazy different, and we'll just be able to translate here. Hasn't necessarily in the past, but she looks better than she's ever been on grass.
So interesting, isn't it, that we talk over and over again about how those two are linked at the hip. Are they not? Their stories are intertwined so much because of the stage of their career and how young they are and their ascent to the top of the sport and the budding Reddit bromance or romance that they desperately want to see, which is not a thing, by the way. It's just fan fiction.
Can you confirm that? Is that confirmed?
No, not at all. It's bullshit.
You're telling me an agent hasn't reached out with a friendly message to her agent saying, hey, let's link up.
Can we just have them have dinner somewhere just to stoke those fires and get a bit more publicity about it? Yeah, come on. It's our attempts to ship these two on. It's amazing. A bullshit thing that got started on Reddit, we have just turned into something else on this podcast. Maybe I shouldn't have even said it to start with.
This is the media ecosystem.
It is, yeah.
2023.
We'll have to do a response to ourselves next week. Just to She looked good, I thought, on grass. I thought she looked fine.
Yeah.
I thought she looked fine on grass last year as well. She just ran into an Elise Cornet buzzsaw that took out many a player last year. So I wouldn't say she's favorite. Maybe we can get onto this in part 2, but I wouldn't be surprised if she's very, very close to winning this title or winning it in the next 2 weeks.
4th round, her best showing at Wimbledon in 2021. As always, Iga Watch is on. We should stop being surprised by her, though, in general. I feel like she's just that good. To finish up with the ATP, Simon, Alexander Bublik, fascinating person. Maybe the king of shithousery on the ATP at this point of his career, but some of his rants to himself, some of the language he uses is offensive, homophobic, etc. But his on-court demeanor is also frightening in an entertaining way. He is not likable, and yet you're unable to stop watching him. I have a hard time explaining his aura.
Some of these men that are on these...
Basically half the tour I've just described, where it's like, oh God, like, really, man?
Is it the psychological reactance, right? Is the idea that people start getting angry, or anger is a sign of a threat, right? What the hell is he threatened by? That's what I want to know. Often with these dudes as well, it's just like not a high level of emotional
development.
Yeah,
probably.
just like it's just not very intelligent, right? From that perspective, not a lot of emotional intelligence. All of that being said, this was an absolute piss take, this final, from a tennis perspective. It was hilarious to watch. And if you are in the market of hate watching Alexander Zverev being bodied by people on a grass court, this was very entertaining to watch, including, it was match point or break point in the second set where Bublik stood basically on the service line to take the piss out of the second set of Alexander Zverev. It was very entertaining to watch.
It's hard to look away. We'll talk about the men's side a bit later, but I do just want to say generally about the ATP, not liking what I'm seeing, Simon.
I don't think that's a bold statement at this point, to be honest. It's not a great tour to watch. Not a lot of good people on it either.
We'll leave that there. When we come back for part 2, it's provocative question time, Wimbledon edition. We've got a lot of them coming up next after the break. Welcome back to the Open Era podcast, the third slam of the year. Our slam rankings are changing every minute of every day, Simon. I think if you went back and listened to our early episodes, we had wildly different favorite slam rankings than we do now. I know you've got some mixed feelings about Wimbledon as well, but where is the Wimbledon fandom for you at this point in your life?
Yeah, it's a weird one, isn't it? I feel like it's changed quite dramatically through my 20s and my early 30s. I don't actually get up for it a whole lot anymore. And I think this would be very different if I was still living in the UK because of how entrenched it is into the psyche and it being on the BBC and all the stuff that goes with it and the pomp and the ceremony and it sort of seeping into the national conscious. I think from where I sit now in Canada, I mean, it's clearly not a big deal in Canada to start with, right? For some, it doesn't have the media coverage, and also it's just bad hours for watching as well. So I think all of those factors go into it. And I think another part of it is that it's kind of been a bit of a wild show over the last year. Obviously, it being an exhibition last year, I think becoming a little boring in the sense of you've not had great finals on the men's side, certainly. And then on the women's, you've had a bit of a cycle of players, which I think has been the exciting part of it. So across the board, I would say I'm tepid excitement for this one.
Damn, a searing indictment and an excellent lead into our preview section of this episode. I will say in Canada, it's interesting because of where this falls in the calendar. A bit of a dead-ish period, a ton of Canadians involved. The thing is, none of them are really firing right now. And we're in a situation where, at least in singles, you could see no Canadians left by around Thursday, which would be quite something considering how many players have entered. There's basically a short list of things I think that it'll take to break through the regular sports discourse for Wimbledon to be the topic of conversation. And I think they involve a few of the people we're about to talk about right now, Simon. So maybe we'll start with question number 1. Is Iga the third favorite at Wimbledon?
I think so.
I feel less comfortable even selecting Sabalenka and Rybakina as the clear favorites on the surface. I do think it's that unpredictable to a sense. I know Sabalenka is nailed on for a lot of people as the out and out favorite, which I find a bit surprising. Simon, I think in these situations, at least, that's been a troubling aspect for Sabalenka. Australian Open final aside and semifinals at French Open aside. I mean, in that match, she was pretty much the favorite, you could say, against Mikova. I'm not comfortable designating Sabalenka as the clear favorite. So with that in mind, I think Iga is right where she should be registered as the third favorite, but I think the front two are not locked in at all.
Yeah, I guess we should offer a preface to this whole thing of saying these are provocative questions, by the way. It's
super provocative.
It's meant to incite. I mean, basically the question is Iga or Sabalenka the second favorite?
Or is Rybakina the first nailed on favorite for you?
I think she is.
That's surprising to me. That's very surprising, I would say.
Why?
I guess the repeatability aspect, like you're leaning into pretty hard, correct? Like that's where you're feeling the most comfort here.
But it's not like she's had a bad season or anything, right? Like she's
right.
The second or third best player in the world, or maybe the first if you want to go in for that. She knows the surface well. She won last year. Her serve is still working incredibly well.
the UK and mainland Europe has destroyed her sinuses to a point where I'm not sure where she's at physically. I feel like I was there recently. I know what the allergy season could be like, and it's no joke.
Someone get this poor woman a Claritin or some Loratadine or some of these, please.
Put it this way. If I had to select one of the three of them to win this title, I might take Iga. And I'm not just saying that to be controversial or provocative. I truly believe that.
Is that because of the draw?
Yeah, and I just... Sabalenka is going to be... She's going to be a target for a few reasons, but I do wonder if all of the other noise involved with her is going to be an issue. So I do feel like there'll be... Well, Wimbledon want to be jerks. I know the French Open gets this rap of being the jerk slam, and I mean, the Aussie Open's up there as well. But when Wimbledon wants to go after you, they'll go after you. And I feel like that could be a situation we watch unfold.
Yeah, the Wimbledon crowd feels like one of those passive-aggressive, horrible bullies in school. They go out of their way just to be vindictive, where it's like silent treatment or like knowing exactly how to push someone's buttons. Contrast that with the French Open just outright booing people and being in-your-face levels of jerks. Wimbledon is much more subtle levels of bullying, I would say.
So it'll happen, and I hope she can respond to the best of her ability, but I feel like Iga is the people's sweetheart. She'll be the people's champion. Yeah, that's where I'm leaning.
Alrighty, can I ask you a provocative question?
Please.
Does Andy Murray need to stop talking so much about how good he is on grass and start actually winning tournaments or like doing well on this surface? Just quote Andy Murray, I do believe I'm one of the best grass court players in the world and I'm feeling physically really good. I prepared well, so there's no reason why I can't have a good tournament. Is he one of the best grass court players in the world? Is that true?
Well, currently, it's fascinating because in this interview he mentions experience quite a few times, and unfortunately, it doesn't work like that when it comes to your body not being close to what it once was, maybe 70% of what it once was, because I think Andy Murray at his peak is definitely one of the best grass court players. He definitely has the experience. Nobody really has taken out Novak on this stage except him. So I understand the bravado. I also understand how many articles or how many interviews he has to do, Simon. Like this man is pumping out more content than some newsrooms right now with some of these quotes. So I feel a bit sad for him where he's like, yeah, I'm still good. We'll see how it goes. If he can play Steph in that second round, I think it'll be hilarious. There will be a lot of chances for ass clownery in that one. But that, to me, will be a very indicative moment because over 5 sets, I just do not believe it. I really don't. And I hate to say it, but the comeback has been cool. I do like how he's grinding. I do like how he's winning these challenger events. I think the quote unquote love for the game is cool. I also wonder if he can't leave the game. And there's this kind of tough situation he's having where he can't reconcile the fact that he's not up to it anymore, and it being at the very top. So he has to talk this way. But I want to see what he's like against Steph in the second round. 5-setter.
Again, Dev, provocative question. If he goes on a run and makes the second week here, sure, whatever. But I don't know. I don't think that one irked me so much. It's just being like, that seems inaccurate. That just seems wrong. Like in terms of how you should be talking about this, but whatever. He's a professional athlete. You got to pump yourself up somehow.
It's like a politician, man.
Actually, another provocative question. Why are people saying that Petra Kvitova is going to win this tournament?
That's a bit of a weird one to me. And I don't think you'll find few bigger Petra stands than us two. But this does feel to me like a lifetime achievement nod kind of thing where it's like, hey, Petra, we love you. We love your game. We love when you were at Wimbledon at your peak, winning big titles here. Of the many people who could win on the WTA side, why not Petra, right? It'd be foolish to bet against her, but I think you can comfortably bet against her.
Yeah, I know she won last week and she knows the surface really well, but she's not been past the third round in 9 years, Devang. 9 years on this surface. If she's really so comfortable on the grass court, I think you'd expect a little more end product in a decade, is what I would say on this one. So the fact that I think I've seen articles having her as the 4th favorite in this tournament, or like some people legitimately writing that she's going to win it. I don't know. It seems a bit rich for my blood, as Ted Lasso would say.
We can have the best of both worlds here because when she wins the tournament, we can clip this exact segment and be like, look at these bozos. Look at these morons who don't know anything.
Dev, we said in the first segment, it's all about creating content, right? So here we go.
It's true. I like this next one. I think this is good. Simon, here's the question. Is Novak Djokovic going to phone this in now that the slam record is secured? I love the phrasing of that. Is he just going to mail it in?
I think there's a reasonable chance that this one's actually kind of true, is that we've seen what's happened when he just doesn't give a shit at tournaments. Like various times where he secured like world number 1 and he's playing for nothing, or it's like a middling tournament where he doesn't really have any investment in it. Maybe I'm not sure you could say the same for, but he's still going for some history, right? Like he'll still psych himself up for some level of importance to a victory here. At the same time, there is a certain sense that if he gets into a bit of trouble, and previously he'd be like, no, fuck it, I've got to get over the line here. Is there a slight, even a 5% drop off where he's like, I don't need to do this anymore. I've got the thing that I've been working for my entire career. Do you think there's any chance that that's true?
I wanted to. I really did. But here's where I can't. Because if he gets this, he ties Roger at 8 Wimbledons. And he also ties Fed and Bjorn for 5 in a row. You better believe that shit matters to him. And I don't think he feels safe at 23 either, because Rafa has come back before from the dead several times. So I do feel like he thinks he needs to at least up it to 25. I don't think this speedometer will slow down for him. Like he's going to go for it. But to your point, and I've heard Goran Ivanisevic mention this a few times, Simon, how like he has this ability to change systems when slams come and the ability to switch on. I do think on grass, things can go sideways far quicker than on other surfaces. The thing is, he obviously has heaps and heaps and heaps of experience, so it would take a very special circumstance for that to happen. He's an absolute shark in tie breaks, so I feel like that opportunity that we often see when a lot of these sets go to tie breaks, he's lights out there, and he has that extra gear. Maybe it takes a bit longer for him to kick it in. The thing is, like, Musetti maybe in the 4th round. That's a dream matchup. Maybe Rublev in the quarters. Like it feels like Novak in 3rd gear should be good enough.
The Federer factor is the big one here.
You know, he wants all of those. All the Fed's, everything Fed did, he wants to kill it. He wants to erase it.
I always think that's like a sneaky thing that people don't talk about enough, which is that relationship between him and Nadal isn't so bad. But like him spiting Federer is really the thing that's driving his career as opposed to anything else.
100%. He's the spite goat for sure. Because I mean, look at him. Look at what he's been able to accomplish. All right. Next one.
Yeah, this next section is sponsored by the CBC, trying to get more gambling content onto our national broadcaster. So we asked you 2 questions and grouping them together. Why is Carlos Alcaraz considered the betting favorite here? And conversely, why is Elena Rybakina not the overwhelming betting favorite to win this title?
My inside knowledge here, Simon, and I am no expert at all, but I think the idea is that if you get someone who is not a tennis fan necessarily, and they see the 1 next to someone's name, they'll end up betting on that person with the 1 beside their name, right? Overall. I also think it's an idea of the books trying to get people's money or take their money, so to speak, and favor themselves by making it more
enticing.
Yeah, enticing to select those players. Maybe that's probably why. I feel like it's insane Novak is not the betting favorite. Not sure what book you were looking at.
What a great industry. Sounds like
It is interesting though, the amount of betting related content that we'll see at Wimbledon. How jammed in will it be? Probably the same as we've seen so far.
I feel like in general, there are certain things that the sporting world just cannot turn down at the moment. One is a Saudi checkbook and the other is betting money. Those are basically the things that are floating around or what is funding most of sport at the moment. Final provocative question.
Yes.
This is one for all of you lovers out there. Is Yelena Ostapenko getting too much love for her chances here?
Is she getting too much love in general? Is that even a more controversial question, Simon?
I have seen articles with her getting to the semi-finals of this tournament.
She's also kind of a jerk. Like, I get it. I get the idea of like being your own person and dancing to the rhythm of your own beat. I do respect it, especially in tennis, but also sometimes I'm not having it from Penko. I also agree, Simon, that this is probably too much love for her chances here. We say this every Grand Slam when it comes to the WTA, but like, that's a bad section. And she is in one of the tougher sections I can recall in some time, with Haddad Maia lurking, with Rybakina there, with Cornet there. Even her first rounder Greet Minin's no slouch.
Greet is such a great name. Let's wrap this section up.
We have to make picks, don't we?
We do, which is what I was just about to ask you. Who's winning this tournament for you?
Okay. Well, we're both picking Novak, I'm guessing, which is no fun at all. But who is he playing? Like, how's that going to go down, I guess, is my question for you.
I think he does play Carlos Alcaraz in the final.
Yeah.
I think that ends up happening.
I'm going to take...
You taking Jon Isner?
Well, Captain America himself. Another American that I sentimentally, I wouldn't mind making a run here, and that's Foe. If we can get Francis Tiafoe, Holger Rune in that fourth round, please sign me up. I think that'll be electric. But I think whoever comes out of that section will be the finalist on the top half. How about that? I think he'll beat one of Foe or Holger Rune for slam number 24.
What's his record at Wimbledon like? He did all right last year, didn't he? If I remember.
Tiafoe, he did, yeah. They had that heartbreaker against David Goffin, but you shouldn't be losing that match. I think Francis Tiafoe this year will not lose a match like that.
No, not with Wayne Ferreira in his corner, who,
correct.
Big question marks on that energy after watching him in break point.
We didn't pick the women's side, so I'll let you go first.
Elena Rybakina wins. Comes out of the difficult side. I think she's a 2-time slam champion at the end of this.
I love it. I'm still surprised you're not checking this illness, but I hope she gets better soon. I'm going to pick Iga. That's very boring, Iga and Novak, but I do feel like this would be a pretty stunning win for her, even though she's the betting favorite. The draw is not bad, and I do feel like the people that are lurking are people that she can take care of till we get to a potential blockbuster final against whether it be Sabalenka or Rybakina.
Okay, let me ask you a different question, because we are in provocative question time to wrap this up. You can't pick Novak, you can't pick Carlos, you can't pick the big three on the women's side. Give me a winner who's not that on the men's and the women's side.
Oh, okay.
I wonder if we're going to get the same. It's going to be interesting.
Give me an Alina Svitolina run here, a sneaky run.
Okay.
That's my bold pick on the women's side.
Do you have a men's one?
Men's side, Tommy Paul making it to the quarterfinals.
I was talking about winning, Dev.
Win this tournament entirely. It's not happening though, Simon. Sinner. Okay, how about this? Sinner somehow stops Novak from getting to the final and then wins the final. Sinner and Novak have an all-time great semifinal. Sinboy somehow recovers enough to win the final against Tiafoe or Holger Rune.
Yeah, Sinboy was who I had as well. I think he's a lot better on grass than people give him credit for. And I think the matches that he has lost give a certain indication of his overall quality level. I think he has a really deep run in him here. The women's side, I would probably look at someone like Ons Jabeur, because I think that would be a really interesting pick to see what happens.
Love it. Cannot wait. If someone wants to beat Novak, go for it. Make my day. Cool? Cool. All right. When we come back to wrap up this week's show, it's Parting Shots on Open Era. Hope you enjoy it.
Welcome back to the Open Era podcast. Time for part 3. Time for Parting Shots. Devang, let me ask you a question before we get into the return of Breakpoint, or maybe tangentially related to Breakpoint. I have never realized how similar Ons Jabeur and Bianca Andreescu look until watching Breakpoint.
I have. This isn't exactly breaking news to me. I do feel like tennis players are a bit pigeonholed because of the similar looks everyone kind of has to have, like the bandana look or like the visor look. Like there's a lot of repeatability, but they do have similar faces. I could see it. Yeah. Congrats.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Let's transition nicely to Breakpoint, the return of it. Devang, we were chatting off recording, and I basically said to you, I don't watch any of the actual tennis elements to Breakpoint because I find it quite boring. I'm not the right kind of audience for that, on the sense that I've already watched these matches, and revising them again is not particularly new to me. I don't get any new angles or any of that stuff. I just kind of get a highlights package, which is, totally fine for the audience they want to curate, but I kind of find the behind the scenes stuff much more interesting. So I sort of fast forward through to find when the players are talking or see their families and all that kind of stuff, because I find that much more interesting, especially in relation to doing a podcast on it. What are the things that stood out for you on Breakpoint? Have you seen it, I guess? Let's start with that.
I started it. We watched a couple of episodes at least. We got 2 Saints and Sinners.
Love it.
I found some of the Kyrgios stuff tougher to watch this time around, and I maybe had a little more sympathy for the direction they were going in the first block of episodes, but I was like, nah, I'm not going to continue doing this. But I did think the star of the first couple episodes for me was, like, to your point, Jonovich and her dad and Ratko and like their relationship, and how the whole idea of basically the oldest story known to tennis and the idea of a family picking up and moving everything and devoting everything to the dreams and hopes of one person in that family, and kind of changing everyone's lives for that, and that pressure that also resides on the person they choose, who in this case is Isla, and like just getting a glimpse into that relationship and getting a glimpse into her psyche, I thought was much better than the first block, and I thought that was really intriguing. So I thought that was good, and I think Ons is a scene stealer. Like it's impossible not to watch her and maybe not agree with everything she does, if that makes sense, but also understand where she's coming from. And I think that's a unique ability that she has. So I think them choosing her, I felt like obvious to me that they should do this, but the fact they did and did a good job with it, I'm glad. I did find it, the contrast with Kyrgios, though, a bit much. And maybe that's just my anti-Kyrgiosness shining through.
Yeah, I thought relationships was really the big theme of these final 5 episodes, and what the close-knit relationships are, oftentimes like one-on-one relationships. So you can throw in Francis Tiafoe and his partner as well on that one, which I thought was really interesting. She seemed very cool as well, like someone very grounded, and that seemed like a very solid relationship and the real backbone of his tennis. You obviously mentioned the Tomljanovic one, which she seems just really cool. Like, she seems like a really cool person. And I don't know, her dad walked that very fine line between, like, I think of a coach trying to do this stuff.
Is this good? Yeah. Is this good or is this abusive? That's the tennis coach line.
Yeah. I think he was trying desperately hard to be a source of levity of someone who obviously is from his perspective very tightly wound. I came up with much more of an understanding of who that player was. Yeah. And just how fucking pressure filled that match against Serena Williams was at the US Open. Like, I felt the pressure, and I think they did a really good job in the editor of that episode to ratchet up the stakes for it. And I think it puts that win into starker. It increases the weight of it and how good of a win it actually was, with everything in the circus following it around. And I thought she handled herself just spectacularly. So I thought that was a really, really cool thing to see. And I'm certainly, and I think if the one thing that Breakpoint has done is it's found some more of these players inside of the top 100 and inside of the top 50 that you can root for. And she certainly is a player that I feel much more, connected with, and someone I want to see do well now.
Agreed. I think they got into their groove as the season went along. And if they were to come back and do it again next season, I feel like it would be stronger. There's the idea of building this next generation of stars, but I think the actual idea of tennis and like what is involved with it and the tour are areas that aren't explored enough as it is. Like, I know Taylor Fritz's partners basically leading the non-tour based charge for content creation, and it's making a difference. And you also get a glimpse into how insane this life is, like how they are basically, as I think Pog on the Discord alluded to, people in cages traveling around, doing certain things, doing the same things over and over again, and then having their biggest meltdowns or biggest successes for all to see on huge stages. Like, it's pretty effed up if you consider it. So to get a look under the hood and see how they make this magic or make this gruel in some senses, or you get a sense of why maybe someone is so distasteful on the court. It's like, oh, this is what they're like off the court. So I do think there's room to improve, but I did enjoy what I've seen from this last block of episodes a bit more than the first block. Just too much Kyrgios, man.
Yeah. So just a couple of quick hitters to wrap up on Breakpoint. One thing that really struck me, and I don't think you've seen it yet, but just like the almost platonic love between Francis Tiafoe and Carlos Alcaraz in the locker room, I thought was absolutely really just wonderful to see. Carlos seems like just a really fucking nice kid, like someone who's crazy for a 20-year-old to have that level of emotion intelligence. I loved watching him on camera being like, nah, I don't feel pressure, I'm good. To be raised the way that he was and to have that level of ability to take all of these moments in and sort of to have the ascent that he has done and still remain grounded and level-headed is really remarkable. And I think that shows why those two have such good a relationship and good friendship between each other, which was totally nice to see. And please more of this. That's the kind of thing to focus on. And I think it stands in contrast to the Kyrgios and Tsitsipas stuff, right? And I guess we can't escape this segment without asking, Stefanos Tsitsipas kind of racist?
Yeah. That quote broke through the tennis wall and was circulated around, and people were like, what the hell? And it's like, yeah, that sounds like something he would say too. And I mean, the explanation also seemed like something Steph would say, and that's not a positive thing.
No, I didn't mean the NBA started basketball and black people. I just meant NBA people and black people. What? You're saying the same thing.
I think I've been quite charitable when it comes to Stefanos in terms of like trying to be like, maybe his parents are jerks, or like maybe it's not easy being in his shoes. But I do think his role to play in all of this is becoming more evident as the days go by, and seeing some of his actions on court, and then obviously this, you're getting a bigger glimpse into maybe who he is, and a lot of it. Maybe the more tolerable stuff is just overtly manufactured as well. So it's a damn shame, but...
So those images, right, between Carlos Alcaraz, Francis Tiafoe, and standing in contrast to the exploits of Tsitsipas and Kyrgios, I think you have that real binary of masculinity and which direction it can go in displayed within Breakpoint, because you have two individuals in Tsitsipas and Kyrgios who just do not control emotions at all and do not feel, comfortable, I think, expressing it in a way, or have a framework and understanding of how to express it, or grew up in that way. And I think that comes out in various different capacities, not least in the self-abuse that you see with Kyrgios, and the rage and the anger and all that kind of side of it. And I think that's obviously very sad to see. I mean, obviously, as a human being, you can't feel anything but empathy and sadness when someone is being self-harming to themselves and having meltdowns and all that kind of stuff, and just finding themselves in despair. I think this, at the same time, we don't really help ourselves as a greater and wider society on this, of what we put up as media content and what we expose to this, because having Nick Kyrgios front and center of this, I would say this almost glorifies it. I think it probably does. It comes across as being like, yeah, I mean, he's a jackass and he has this domestic violence thing and he's yelling in his box and he's angry. But at the same time, it's just kind of him being him. And it didn't really explore a whole lot of the nuance of that. And I think overall it came across pretty shit to me.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think it's supposed to be fun. This whole thing is supposed to be fun, and I think you get that feeling when you watch Foe and Carlos, and you don't get that feeling when you see Nick and Stefanos. So I think that it boils down to that, basically.
Yeah, and I think just to sum up on the Tsitsipas stuff, like, we're making light of a situation, and I think he has so much growth to do in this area, not least because it's a predominantly white tour. It does feel like this is someone who has not been either educated or has not sought out people that can help him understand why some of his comments and actions might be interpreted as being problematic. And it certainly seems like he hasn't done that work. And this, I think, just adds fuel to that fire.
Well said. Moving on, the WTA announced their new calendar for 2024. Simon, you have some issues with the current calendar.
I do. So in July, WTA plays tournaments on grass, clay, and hardcore within the space of 4 weeks of each other. That is bizarre. It's absolutely bizarre that this tournament ends up the way that it does. Something's wrong here, Dev. Something really is wrong.
That and the new schedule I mentioned, there's like a bunch of 2-week events. Beijing is coming back and all this stuff happening. But I do think it's a real shame some of these tournaments that we've come to love, especially Ostrava, being kind of left to the wayside as they reorganize this and kind of open up spots for the people they want to open them up for, aka possibly Saudi Arabia. It's a damn shame. I mean, the tour itself is ridiculous in the sense of like, there's really no rest for these people. And if you're making most of these mandatory, the big ones, it ends up becoming quite the slog for 90% of the year. This is not a surprise. And I do think Sloane Stephens making a point to recognize like there are positives here. The fact that the prize money is eventually going to equal out in most places by 2027. That is good, but they're kind of paving the way by covering over quite a few prestigious tournaments that have great histories.
And I think this all comes back to a labor issue and a payment issue as well, of how you can spread your tour out, which this doesn't become so much of an issue if you're not solidly relying on appearance fees and on prize money. Like if you are salaried or you have a minimum salary for a lot of these players inside of the top 300 or 500 or pick whatever you want, then it becomes much more manageable to pick and choose the tournaments that you have. And you can have a bit more of it's not such a big deal, right? If you get bounced in round one and you have to fly to Frankfurt from Melbourne to go and play a tournament for a Tuesday to try and earn prize money. So I think that would make a big significant distance. And then obviously trying to regionalize this stuff as much as possible would also help.
Speaking of Saudi Arabia, they were in the news a lot in regards to tennis. Quite a few people making comments on this. That schedule release, also some news from Steve Simon and Billie Jean King saying that they're talking to the Saudis, at least the WTA is, and that Billie Jean King says they should talk to the Saudis because they could help facilitate change in the kingdom in regards to some of their laws regarding gay people and other human rights matters that clearly trouble quite a few of us. Andy Murray saying that he could see himself playing in Saudi Arabia events, which is a U-turn from what he had said earlier, and when he refused to take appearance money to compete in exhibitions there. He also mentioned it becomes something totally different if they become ATP sanctioned events. So bit of a tough week in the sense of sports washing news, Simon, but this is how it works, right? Like you keep making these things official, and the players who we might hope to take a stand end up maybe using those official titles to maybe make excuses.
This was inevitable. I think if anyone's been around the sporting world over the last few years, especially tennis as well, is that this has been coming for a long time. And quite frankly, it's surprising that it's not happened already. I think I'm on record as one of my predictions is that we'll have a fifth major in Saudi Arabia at some point within the next year or two. Like I think it's that soon, given the quantity of money that's being pumped into it, and just given all the things that we've seen the accelerator pedal firmly pressed on this. I think the secondary point is ultimately, how do you think change happens, and how ultimately are you able to work with any of these organizations, institutions, or states to get some change through? And I think from the WTA perspective, it's, do you feel like having dialogue with them is actually going to force legislative change and subsequently judicial change, and like on the ground levels of change for the LGBTQ community? I mean, that's a debate for as long as time, and we don't have to get into it here. I think I'd be on record as saying that's, incredibly naive to believe that would be the case. But I think other people would hold different political views about that.
And it's not like they're asking for these things either. Like they're all presented as this could happen, or like, I think we could create a dialogue, and like if we come to the table, they'll have to come to the table too. But none of these proclamations or none of what Steve Simon is saying is contingent on them actually doing these things. So I think it is quite a bit of PR work. I mean, Billie Jean King kind of has a track record in this regard when it comes to the financial side and looking out for maybe first the financial aspects above maybe collective rights or collective action. She was part of a group that was involved in the takeover of the PHF, which is a women's hockey league in North America that has just put a ton of people out of work without much say of how they'll be compensated. So I do think this idea of putting a shiny face or a nice face on just common capitalism is also a pretty common thing we're seeing these days. And you're tying this in with a little dose of sports washing. And here we are with people like Iga as well saying she'd have no problem playing in Saudi. It's everywhere. This is basically all sport now. And those early whispers or early warning signs that we saw were talked about by some, but nothing was really done. And here we are.
Well, I think the other thing to point out about this as well is that it's working.
Yeah.
It's actually working. It's legitimately doing the job that it's supposed to do. So if you ever wonder why these states do this, it's because it's incredibly successful. And it should be pointed out, I guess, to roll out this surface, that this is not new. Many, many decades, centuries, in fact. So this is just following a playbook from a different lens and a different perspective.
John McEnroe, shockingly, was one of the people that has said they shouldn't entertain Saudi money yet. But I'm assuming that will change probably soon.
I couldn't work out where this came from. Is this coming from like an American exceptionalism lens of being like, no, those US good, Saudi bad?
Well, the PGA thing, people are referencing 9/11 still, right? They're like, why they shouldn't do this, which I think there's 8 800 different things as well you can reference as well. But I think there is some jingoism involved. In McEnroe's defense, he did say, look at what a disaster the golf thing has been. And I'm like, yeah, like maybe that should be something that tennis looks at, because there are a lot of similarities there. Like Novak was talking about how golf and tennis share the most similarities as tours, so they should look to one another for kind of examples, good and bad, of what to do. And he mentioned that, and I'm like, yeah, well, there is a bad one. Like, I don't think this is smooth by any means of what's been happening in golf. Whether or not this is for the better of golf, plenty remains to be seen there. So I wonder if they're taking that to mean, oh yeah, look at the bad stuff too.
I think we that's the funny part, is that we get lost in all of this stuff from a moral standpoint, from a political lens, and all from an ethical lens. And then just like from an absolute bare bones, is this any good? Live Golf is fucking terrible, Dev. It's a terrible product. And the same way that like all of these aging footballers being signed to the Saudi League, it's terrible to watch. Like, it's really, really bad. So it's not like there's a good track record of things that actually have moved the game forward for either of those tours in any capacity.
All right, shall we move on? Sabalenka Bush back at Wimbledon.
Yeah, and Sabalenka we didn't touch on from her breakpoint exploits as well. She's featured in the last episode of Breakpoint for the World Tour Finals. She was interviewed by the BBC during the course of this week. Obviously, it's her return to the All England Club. She comments on this at Breakpoint, and she also comments on it. And I think we'll see a lot of her over the next 2 weeks, just because of the subject of this interview that she did with the BBC, and also that she's going to be at the business end of this tournament. I sent a message to you yesterday, Dev, saying I did not think she came across very well in Breakpoint. I didn't think she was someone that I particularly wanted to root for. I'm sure this is locked up in my own personal baggage about feelings around how she has acted throughout her career and some of the comments that she's made in general. They sort of pay a little bit of lip service to the Ukrainian Russian invasion of Ukraine in Breakpoint as well. It's very, very brief. I think it's about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes that it's touched upon. And they do sort of have Sabalenka comment on it. There's nothing in there, I don't think, to be, particularly, there's nothing like headline grabbing in it. But in general, it's going to be interesting to see how she's received at this tournament. I think that's the one that I would look at.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this in the first parts, Bush. I'll be fascinated. I don't have high expectations. And not to say Sabalenka's handled the situation perfectly at all. I know what we're going to get from this crowd, and it's not going to be good. And I'm very curious to watch that Breakpoint episode, because I think I'm pro Sabalenka generally. I think she kind of tries to have fun, and it's kind of my baseline for who I like to back in terms of general vibes. But a whole lot of stuff going on around her, and it's a lot of it's not on the court. And I think the pressure will also be there for her as one of the co-favorites, and how these three, and maybe more so Iga and Sabalenka, which is again a diss to Rybakina for no reason at all, except I feel like even as the defending champ, it is kind of a race between these two, and see who can take care of business. It's going to be some good theater, and I hope we don't get anything too stupid happen from said crowd or from Sabalenka herself, because like I said, I don't think she's necessarily handled the situation perfectly either.
No, definitely not. Right, we're going to run long, Dev, so I'm going to give you a bunch of rapid fire things. The Billie Jean King bus tour was in full effect during the course of the last week. This was to mark 50 years since the birth of the WTA. And Billie Jean King herself was leading a bunch of I think it was 19 of the original players did this bus tour. It was pretty cool to see. One of the things that stood out for me on this bus tour, great pride wrist strap that Billie Jean King had on her watch. That was fantastic.
Yeah.
She always looks the part as well, doesn't she? A really good statesman for the tour, or statesperson for the tour. Those Saudi comments perhaps excluded.
Yeah, I love the anecdote she relayed. Just like the prize money was terrible for us back then. Rod Laver made £2,000 in '68, and I made $750. June 21st was a Thursday before Wimbledon in 1973. One of the big reasons everybody showed up was that most of us were staying at the Gloucester Hotel, and it was the first time we got a free room, and we were over the moon. Cool to see them recount this. Billie Jean King, obviously a massive icon and trailblazer. I'm just having a hard time wrapping my head around the other stuff that comes up now with the almighty dollar and building bridges, aka building financial ties. Like, it's tough to see, frankly.
Yeah. Far be it from me to comment on this. Do not waiver feminism says that it's okay to go and take capitalist dollars to try and get equal prize money. I'm just... Maybe there is a version of it and I need to be explaining them. I would be curious to learn more about that. Speaking of capitalist dollars, Devang, Dan Evans, I think, raised some eyebrows during the course of the week. Quote Dan Evans, I speak out because I care about the sport. People always think it's about the governing body, the LTA, but it's not that. I'm not interested in how a doctor's son does in the sport. I'm really not. I couldn't care less. I'm interested in somebody who struggled a bit. Shots fired by the British number one. Is he right, Devang?
I think so. I'm generally a pro Evo guy. That puts me on a bit of an island when it comes to Dan Evans, but I do think he's right here in the sense that we talk about this when it comes to all sports and the idea of making them truly accessible and making it so that tennis isn't just available to you if your dad has a membership at a country club and access to courts all year round. We talk about that as a main tenet of what we want tennis to be. And it does feel a little hollow sometimes when you read the bio, maybe of the next up and comer, and you read that this person has been at the Bollettieri Academy since they were 11 years old or something like that, or 9, like I do think there's the stories of Chris Eubanks or people who have had to grind and had to do it maybe the harder way. They do resonate more with me. And I think they would resonate more with the public as well, just based on the rapid stratification we have in society and like the haves and have not divide growing bigger. It'd be nice to see less of that in the professional tennis ranks. And I think Dan Evans is right.
I think it's getting worse in sport as well. I think sport's oftentimes a petri dish of what's going on in wider society, and the acceleration that's happening in the gulf between what's required, not just from an infrastructure perspective in sport, like having access to a court or court time or being in proximity to a court to start with. Like, are you in walkable distance? Do you have a court that's within 20 minutes of where you are? All that kind of stuff. Are you able to attend an academy? Any of the stuff that's actually required to be a top level player? This is not like the old days where it's like, I was just playing on a cracked court that, no one was using for 15 years. And then I went to be a Wimbledon champion. That's just not how the sport, and that's not how broader sport works in general now. So I think that's getting bigger and bigger.
Speaking of the haves, Johnny Mack at Stanford.
Johnny McEnroe gave the commencement speech at Stanford. I will admit, as someone who went to the university in the United Kingdom, what the fuck is a commencement speech? I have absolutely no idea what this is. Why is he wearing a funny hat to start with? And
they bring in a celeb to talk to the kids who graduated. I cannot recall who my commencement speaker was, to be honest. I think it was someone from my university.
Did John McEnroe go to Stanford?
He did go to Stanford, though, just to confirm, and led them to an NCAA championship.
Love it. Justifiable reason for him to give a commencement speech, which I have now learned what that is. So fantastic. Natalia Stevanovic is making her debut at Wimbledon. Main draw. She is 28 years old. She was the former junior number 5. However, she had a liver cyst and it sidelined her for 16 months between 2015 and 2016. She has battled back to get a career high world number 162. This is a really cool story. These are always ones that come up for players making their debuts at Wimbledon. We'll see how she does, but in general, cool story. Wanted to flag this one really quickly.
Awesome news.
Finally, to wrap up putting shots, Devang, let me ask you a question. Do you know the name of Jon Isner's children?
No, I don't. And I cheated and I read the article. And now that I do know, I was expecting something even more off the wall than what I had seen from Captain America.
You wanted some more Whoppers?
Yeah. Literally Whopper would have been a good name, right?
Yeah, possibly.
Burger King guy. Yeah.
That's a good one. Children's names are very funny because they're really reflective of where you grew up, what's cool at the time, like some level of individualism of giving children weird names to satisfy your own ego and all that kind of stuff. He was very religious. The one that stood out to me was calling your son Chapel. I've never heard of anyone being called Chapel before.
You have now. You'll probably be on the tour in 20 years. You got Chapel, Hunter Grace, and then
Hobbs
and Mac.
Hobbs and Mac. Does not sound like a cop drama in the 2000s?
It does.
What do they call them? A boomer cop drama, right? Because only old people watch cop dramas.
I would put money on Jon Isner running for Congress, by the way. I would put some dollars on that.
Deep red state?
Georgia. How about Georgia?
Absolutely. Sounds good.
Parting shots. 2 challenges remaining.
Is there anything that you wanted to call out?
Concerts. I went to a concert on Thursday, Tears for Fears. Blast from the Past, a band though that I've listened to my whole life, and it was outdoors, and there's been a lot of smoke in the air in Toronto, but for that day, it kind of cleared up, and it was just a truly great experience. And I had been kind of out on concerts for a while, especially indoor ones. They don't really fly with me these days, but the fact that this was outdoors on a lovely summer night, it was great.
I need to go back and see some more shows. It's really what I need to do. Maybe we can go to a show together when I'm in Toronto. How about that, Dev?
Let's do that. Deal.
My 2 challenges remaining. I wanted to highlight the work of Mark Fisher. I stumbled on Mark Fisher when doing a bunch of reading in a different area. Mark Fisher is a philosopher who sadly died a few years ago. He wrote the book called Capitalist Realism. It's about 70 pages long. You can find a PDF on it if you just search for it on Google. But just a remarkable thinker. He's a British guy. Just his work just really opened my eyes to so many different things. And I just wanted to acknowledge just like how beautiful and elegant the things that he said were. And one thing really like genuinely shook me to my core. And it's not happened in a while of reading an academic or something like that. But his whole quote was around neoliberalism and basically saying that you forget all of the marketing that neoliberalism does. Like at its core, neoliberalism is about breaking solidarity. I was like, holy shit. That is so
blew my mind.
It blew my mind. Like its purpose is to make sure that we don't talk to each other. Like it came out of a system where people were organized and together and all that stuff. And it was put in place to try and break that. And then if you want to look at why like the rise of mental health problems, why people feel disconnected, you know, why our cities are built shittily, all this kind of stuff, why they feel like they break down a community. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'll check it out. That sounds great. All right. Before we go, Twitter is no longer working for a lot of us. And I think it's a good time, as our friend Pog did, to mention that our Patreon and our Discord is a great place to chat tennis, especially during the slam. So during Wimbledon, if you want to talk tennis with us, head on over to patreon.com/open era. Want to do a big shout out to Edward M. Reading, who just joined the Discord. We had a few new people who just joined actually today on Wimbledon Eve as we record this. So that's awesome. Big thank you to Edward for joining us on the Patreon. If you join us there, you get access to the Discord. You get the show ad free. Plus you get it early on Sunday nights. We're also on twitter.com/open era pod. Once again, if you can see those tweets, we'll try. We'll try. I mean, at this point, God knows how much we'll be tweeting. But yeah, join us on the Discord. I'm honestly going to spend the majority of my time talking Wimbledon in there anyways, because people in there are great. So yeah, be like them. Join us on patreon.com. For producer Kevin on the ones and twos, and for Simon, thank you so much for listening to Open Era. We'll talk to you next week.